The late afternoon sun burned low across the cracked farmland, casting long shadows that clawed across the barn's weathered planks. Officer Reynolds slowed his truck, noticing Titan, his K-9 partner, lying rigid in the dirt, staring at the barn as if it held a secret meant only for him. The air smelled of wet hay and something darker, metallic, that made Reynolds' stomach tighten. Years of small-town whispers and missing persons had left a quiet ache in this place, a weight that no one could shake. And now, Titan's low growl promised that what everyone had missed for years was about to surface. If you enjoy this story, consider liking and subscribing. It helps us continue sharing stories like this with depth and suspense. The gravel crunched under Reynolds' boots as he approached Titan, whose body was tense, muscles coiled like springs. The K-9 had never behaved like this, never ignored his commands, never hesitated. Yet now, Titan lay flat, chest pressed to dirt, ears flicking toward the barn. The fading light caught in his amber eyes, reflecting a sharp intelligence that made Reynolds swallow hard. Something was wrong. Something more than the usual small-town disappearances. The barn itself loomed like a slumbering giant at the edge of the Reynolds farm. It was gray, sun-bleached, warped in places where decades of weather had claimed its shape. The large sliding door sagged, hinges creaking in the slight breeze. Around it, wild grass had grown thick, a tangled carpet of green and brown, brushing against Reynolds' knees as he moved closer. The air smelled of dust and hay, but beneath it, an iron tang lingered. He paused at the threshold, hand on his holster, eyes scanning the shadows. Titan had risen now, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Reynolds followed the dog's gaze and noticed something he hadn't before. Faint scuff marks in the dirt, footprints pressed into the earth that led straight to the barn side door. They were old, months, maybe years old, but unmistakable. Someone had been here and Titan had found it. Reynolds' phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. A message from Deputy Carson. Any luck? Town's talking again. He typed back quickly, keeping his eyes on the barn. I think I found something. Inside, the barn was darker than the evening suggested. Dust motes floated like tiny spirits in the fading light from the high windows. The air smelled damp, almost sour, and something else, something animal, like a memory of fear, drifted beneath the hay and manure. Titan padded silently ahead, nose low to the ground, ears twitching at every creak of the old wood. Reynolds followed, flashlight cutting swaths through the gloom, revealing stacks of hay bales, rusty farm tools, and old barrels. At first glance, it seemed abandoned, the sort of place a teenager might hide enduring dares. But Titan's growl deepened, vibrating through floorboards. Reynolds froze, listening. Somewhere, deeper in the barn, something shifted. A metallic scrape echoed, soft but deliberate. He whispered, "Titan, show me." The dog responded with a barely perceptible nod and led him to farthest corner, where the floor sagged slightly, a faint depression in the dusty wood. Reynolds crouched, shining the light closer. The depression wasn't natural. Something heavy had been moved repeatedly. A corner of a floorboard caught on the beam of his flashlight. He knelt, pressing a hand to the wood. It was loose. With effort, he pried it up, revealing a dark cavity beneath. The air that rushed out smelled like mold and something far fouler. Old decay, faintly sweet, like a memory of blood long forgotten. He shined his flashlight inside. The first thing he saw was a tangle of ropes, yellow with age. Then, as his eyes adjusted, the outlines of objects became clear. Crates, jars, old boxes stacked haphazardly. At the very back, a bundle wrapped in tarpaulin, dusty and frayed. Titan's growl became a warning, low and throaty. Reynolds' hand shook slightly as he reached for the bundle. Something about it set his stomach roiling, an instinctive dread that had nothing to do with his imagination. Carefully, he tugged at the fabric. It resisted at first, then gave way. Inside were the remnants of a lifelong hidden. Clothing torn, decayed. Photographs yellow with age. A child's small shoes, stiff and brown with dust. Reynolds swallowed hard. Years of whispered rumors about the town's missing, the unspoken tragedies. They all collided here, in this dark, forgotten corner. Titan pressed close, body rigid, staring at the bundle. Reynolds noticed his own reflection in the dog's eyes. Fear, horror, and an impossible responsibility. He had found what the town had ignored, what everyone had walked past, pretending not to notice. Then he noticed something else. A journal wedged between crates, edges chewed by time and rodents. He opened it carefully, flipping through pages yellowed and brittle. Names, dates, confessions, tragedies recorded in careful, meticulous handwriting. Someone had been keeping track of everything, every disappearance, every lie. The final entry, smeared and almost illegible, chilled him to the bone. It referenced a person who had been watching all along, someone trusted, someone who knew every secret in the county. Reynolds felt a shiver run down his spine. The handwriting was familiar. Not immediately, but enough to stir the unease in his gut. Footsteps outside. Soft, hesitant. Reynolds froze. Titan stiffened, ears forward. The barn door creaked, and a figure appeared in the doorway. Sheriff Malcolm Hayes. Gray hair, lined face, eyes that had seen too much, but not enough to prevent this moment. His gaze swept the barn quickly, resting on the floorboards, the bundle, the crates. "Reynolds," he said, voice tight. "You weren't supposed to find this." Reynolds' hand went to his holster. "Sheriff, what is this?" Hayes' face hardened. "Years ago, someone trusted me. Someone I swore to protect. But the town has shadows it doesn't want to face." He stepped closer, looking down at Titan. "Good boy," he muttered, almost a whisper. "You always had a nose for truth." "Why here?" Reynolds demanded. "Why hide all this?" Hayes' lips pressed into a thin line. "Because some things, once seen, can't be unseen. And some people can't be allowed to disappear without reason." His eyes flicked toward the bundle. "This isn't just history. It's proof. Proof that some of us are capable of unimaginable things, and that those we trust most may be the very ones we should fear." A sound from outside, the gravel shifting under boots. Reynolds tensed. More people were coming, drawn by the faint light of his truck and the creak of the barn door. He realized with a sinking heart that the sheriff wasn't the only morally gray character in this story. The entire town, in small ways, had participated in ignorance, in denial, in hiding. Titan growled again, low and steady, warning him. Reynolds nodded. He understood the silent message. Whatever came next, they weren't facing it alone. As they stood over the bundle, the weight of decades pressed down, and Reynolds knew that nothing about this night would leave him unchanged. The barn, once just a relic of a forgotten farm, had become a vault of truths too terrible to ignore. And for the first time, Reynolds understood the depth of the betrayal. Not just personal, but communal, a wound buried under years of indifference. He closed the journal gently, his hand shaking. "We need to tell someone," he said. But the doubt lingered. Who could they trust now? Outside, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the barn shrouded in darkness. Titan lay down again, exactly where he had started, as if claiming the space, guarding the secrets that had waited too long. Reynolds knew they had only scratched the surface, and he wondered if the town would ever forgive itself, or if some truths were meant to stay buried, even when found. If this chapter grabbed your attention, liking and subscribing help support stories that explore small-town secrets and human darkness in detail. The night had swallowed the barn in velvet darkness, and only the pale light from Reynolds' flashlight cut through the gloom. Titan stayed rigid at his side, every muscle taut, sensing something Reynolds could not yet name. The air smelled of damp hay, dust, and something fouler, something rotting that hadn't seen sunlight for decades. Reynolds felt the weight of history pressing down, each heartbeat a hammer echoing through the hollow wood. Outside, the wind whispered through broken fence posts, carrying with the faint rustle of dry leaves. Somewhere, a coyote barked in the distance, its cry lonely, mournful. Reynolds' breath came shallow as he crouched over the bundle once more. He couldn't shake the image of the child's shoes, stiff and cracked with age, the tiny vestiges of a life erased from memory. Titan growled low in warning, his amber eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. "Stay," Reynolds whispered, not entirely confident that he meant the order for the dog or for himself. The barn was a maze of shadows. Crates, old tools, and barrels stacked haphazardly created narrow corridors. The floorboards creaked under every careful step. Reynolds moved toward the journal, flipping back to an entry that had caught his eye. A name, a date, a notation about someone watching carefully, waiting for the right moment. He traced the ink with his finger. A chill ran down his spine. The handwriting was precise, obsessive, like someone trying to control chaos through meticulous record-keeping. Footsteps. Closer this time. Not just one pair, but two, maybe three. Reynolds froze. Titan stiffened beside him. The barn door creaked again, a subtle but deliberate sound, as if inviting them to stop their investigation. "Who's there?" Reynolds called, voice low but firm. No answer. Only the echo of his own words, bouncing off the wooden beams. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. He felt the kind of fear that came from knowing someone could be watching, someone close enough to reach out and touch the truth. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Deputy Carson, flashlight in hand, face pale, eyes wide. "Reynolds, what have you found?" His voice was tight, almost trembling. "Carson, you weren't supposed to come in," Reynolds said, scanning the barn. "This isn't just a discovery. It's evidence of decades of secrets." Carson stepped closer, careful not to disturb the crates. "I know," he said, swallowing hard. I've known about some of this, but I never thought it went this far." His gaze lingered on the bundle and the journal. "Malcolm, he's hiding more than anyone realizes." Reynolds' hand went to the journal. "Show me." Carson hesitated, but finally pointed toward a page detailing names of people who had disappeared. Some were children, some adults. The entries were methodical, almost surgical in their detachment. Yet a few lines were smudged with tears, or maybe blood. Reynolds' stomach turned. "You think he?" Reynolds began. "Yes," Carson whispered. Malcolm knew more than he let on. And some of these disappearances, some were preventable. He made choices, decisions, and he kept us all in the dark. Titan barked, short and sharp, breaking the oppressive silence. Reynolds and Carson both turned to see a shadow flit across the far wall. Something moved beyond the barrels. A rat, maybe, or something bigger. The hair on Reynolds' arms bristled. He moved closer, flashlight scanning the space. A muffled sound came from beneath the loose floorboard. Something small, almost imperceptible, like a groan. Reynolds froze, heart hammering. Titan growled, and the dog's body pressed against him. The sound came again, deliberate, weak, human. Reynolds' mind raced. "Someone's alive down there," he said, disbelief etched in his tone. Carson's hand trembled as he reached for the floorboard. Together, they pried it up, revealing a narrow space beneath the barn, dark and suffocating. A faint cough emerged from the depths. "Hold on," Reynolds said softly. "We're coming." A child, now grown but malnourished and terrified, crawled into the dim light, eyes wide, body shaking. The journal had been a record of survival, not just loss. Reynolds recognized the shock, the trauma, in the way the person flinched at the light. Titan sniffed cautiously, then nudged the survivor gently, offering comfort in the only way he could. Who are you?" Reynolds asked, voice almost breaking. The survivor's voice was hoarse, barely audible. I was taken. Years ago. He watches always." The words trailed off into sobs. Carson's face paled. "Malcolm, did this happen here? In this barn?" Reynolds asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Yes, sometimes. Not all the time. He chose who lived and who didn't." The survivor's words were fragmented, memories spilling like broken glass. Reynolds felt the weight of every lost life in the room, every story untold, every betrayal that had festered beneath the surface of this small town. Reynolds closed his eyes briefly, taking a breath. "We need to get you out," he said, but even as he spoke, the sense of unease deepened. Someone else was out there. Malcolm Hayes, the morally gray sheriff. He had orchestrated this entire shadow, and now, the walls of the barn were not just sheltering history. They were guarding the next move in a game no one else fully understood. A sudden noise from the barn door made both men spin. Malcolm Hayes stood in the threshold, face drawn, eyes hard. "I warned you," he said quietly, almost sorrowfully. "You weren't meant to uncover this." "Not yet." Reynolds tightened his grip on his flashlight. "You're a part of this, aren't you?" "All along." Hayes' lips pressed into a thin line. "I protected some, I let others fall. Choices had to be made. You think this is evil?" "No, it's survival. It's the only way the town stayed alive." Carson stepped forward, voice shaking. "You let people disappear, Malcolm. Children, I kept secrets to protect secrets. You don't understand what it takes to keep a town together. Darkness exists everywhere, Carson. Sometimes it's necessary. Hayes' eyes flicked toward the survivor, and something unreadable crossed his face. Regret, perhaps, or calculation. Titan growled low, warning them, his body taut like a spring ready to strike. The tension was unbearable, a wire stretched tight, threatening to snap. Reynolds' mind raced. He had found the truth, rescued someone, but the real danger, the moral reckoning, was only beginning. The survivor trembled, sobbing quietly, and Reynolds placed a hand on their shoulder. "You're safe now," he said softly. Titan pressed his head against the survivor, offering a steady, grounding presence in the storm of betrayal and moral complexity surrounding them. Hayes stepped closer, voice low. "This isn't over. You think revealing this will make things better? You have no idea what you've unleashed." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "We'll see." The night closed in around them. The barn, the shadows, the lingering metallic scent, all whispered that the town's history was alive, that the hidden darkness had roots far deeper than anyone realized. And Titan, ever watchful, stood between the survivors and the truth, a silent guardian of the secrets that had waited too long. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling dry leaves and bending the tall grass. The town slept, oblivious, unaware that the past had just been pulled into the light, that betrayals once buried were now exposed, and that justice, in its rawest, most human form, was about to demand reckoning. Reynolds looked down at the survivor and then at Hayes, and he knew the journey was only beginning. Every moral compromise, every decision made in the shadows, was about to come crashing into the daylight. And Titan, loyal and unwavering, would be at his side, a reminder that sometimes the truth came from instincts, from courage, from the places others refused to see. The barn smelled of damp wood, dust, and the faint metallic tang of old blood. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the broken window panes, whispering secrets into the night. Reynolds crouched beside the survivor, who shivered under a blanket he had found in his truck. Titan lay at their feet, ears twitching, eyes flicking toward the shadows that seemed to stretch longer in the dim light. Every nerve in Reynolds' body screamed that the night wasn't over, that the town's secrets were far from fully revealed. Malcolm Hayes leaned against a support beam, hands crossed over his chest, jaw tight. His eyes, which had once held authority and familiarity, now shimmered with a mixture of fear, regret, and defiance. He had orchestrated decades of disappearances, choosing who lived and who vanished, all while maintaining a facade of small-town respectability. He wasn't the villain that one might expect from a crime novel. He was human, flawed, broken by choices made under impossible pressures. But humanity didn't excuse betrayal. Carson stepped forward, voice trembling. "Malcolm, how could you? Children, families, all those years. How did you live with this?" Hayes' shoulders slumped slightly, a man weighing every moral compromise he had ever made. "You think it was easy? You think I slept peacefully? Every night, I prayed that what I did, what I allowed, would be enough to keep the town together. I was trapped between protecting innocence and preserving a fragile balance. And every time I looked away, every time I ignored a name, I became part of the darkness. I tried control." Reynolds' jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to yell, to demand justice in the simplest terms. But he realized that Hayes' confession, raw and unguarded, carried more weight than any accusation could. The complexity of human morality, the painful grayness of his choices, made the barn feel smaller, heavier, as if it were pressing down on them all. Titan growled softly, low in his chest, signaling that danger wasn't just moral, it was imminent. Reynolds glanced at the shadow corner where the survivor huddled, then back at Hayes. And then he saw movement. Someone approaching outside, silent, methodical, watching. The realization hit Reynolds before it even formed in words. They weren't alone. Hayes hadn't acted alone. Another figure, someone who had exploited his choices, had continued the cycle of disappearances without hesitation. A betrayal hidden within betrayal. The door creaked open slowly, and a man stepped in, a stranger, but with eyes that Reynolds immediately recognized from the journal's entries. A collaborator, the enforcer, the one who had carried out the darkest acts without remorse. The figure's presence shifted the air, a tangible threat that made every muscle in Reynolds' body tense. "You weren't supposed to survive," the man said, voice calm, almost polite, but carrying the weight of menace. "Some truths are dangerous, some lives expendable." Titan growled, hackles raised, teeth bared. The dog's instincts, honed by years of law enforcement and raw intuition, screamed at Reynolds that the moment to act was now. Reynolds reached for his holster, heart hammering. The survivor clutched at the blanket, eyes wide with terror. But Hayes stepped forward, voice sharp. "No, you're not taking anyone else tonight." His hand rested lightly on the gun at his hip, not in threat to Reynolds, but in defense of the survivor. The sheriff, morally gray yet undeniably human, had chosen a line he wouldn't cross. The tension exploded. The stranger lunged, a brief, chaotic flurry of motion. Titan leaped, teeth snapping, forcing the intruder backward. Reynolds fired, the sound deafening in enclosed space. Chaos erupted. Barrels tipped. Dust and hay filled the air, shadows twisting across the barn walls like spirits disturbed. When the dust settled, the stranger lay unconscious. Titan stood over him, growling softly, guarding ever vigilant. The survivor, trembling, began to cry quietly. Reynolds wiped sweat from his brow, shaking. The moral weight of the night pressed down. Justice had been served. But at what cost? Hayes exhaled deeply. This ends now. No more lies, no more shadows. His eyes softened slightly as he looked at the survivor. "You'll be safe. I promise." Reynolds nodded, but the emotional tension lingered. The town would never be the same. The truths exposed in the barn, the decades of disappearances, the betrayal, the hidden complicity, would ripple outward, changing lives, perceptions, and trust forever. The survivor, finally able to speak, whispered, "Thank you for finding me." Their voice cracked, but there was relief, a fragile sense of hope in the midst of trauma. Titan nudged him gently, a silent affirmation that someone cared, that safety, even if tenuous, was possible. Carson exhaled, voice still shaky. "We have to tell the town. They need to know what happened, what's been hidden for years." Reynolds looked around the barn one last time, the beams creaking overhead, the dust motes shimmering in the flashlight beam like ghosts of the past. He felt the weight of history, the presence of every soul lost and every secret finally exposed. "Some truths," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else, "are heavy, but letting them stay buried doesn't make them lighter. It just makes the cost higher." Hayes nodded, a shadow of sorrow in his eyes. "And the cost has been paid in full, hasn't it?" Reynolds didn't answer immediately. He gazed at Titan, who lay down by the survivor, vigilant yet calm. The dog had led him here, had sensed what humans could not, and had stood steadfast in the midst of moral chaos. There was a quiet dignity in that loyalty, an unspoken reminder that some guardians existed outside of human compromise. The wind outside softened, carrying the faint smell of rain and fresh earth. The night was still, but it felt lighter somehow, as though the barn itself exhaled after holding its terrible secrets for decades. Reynolds placed a hand on the survivor's shoulder. "We'll take it slow," he said, "step by step. You're not alone anymore." The survivor nodded, eyes wet but brightening. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, there was hope, and though the moral shadows would linger, over Hayes, over the town, over themselves, there was a sense of resolution. The past could not be erased, but acknowledgement, rescue, and courage could carve a path forward. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping softly on the barn roof. Titan lifted his head, ears perking, alert but calm. Reynolds exhaled, a long, quiet release of tension. The barn had revealed its secrets. Betrayals were laid bare. Justice, imperfect yet undeniable, had found its way. And as the survivor clung to the promise of safety, Reynolds knew one immutable truth. Even in the darkest shadows of human choice, light, quiet, patient, unwavering, could still exist. The barn door creaked one last time, wind tugging at the loose boards. Titan rose, stretching, and glanced at Reynolds. Together, they stepped into the rainy night, leaving the hidden cellar, the decades of darkness, and the moral complexities behind. Not gone, not forgotten, but finally confronted. And as they walked back toward the town, wet earth underfoot, Reynolds felt the lingering ache of humanity's grayness, but also the unmistakable warmth of survival, loyalty, and the courage to face truths long ignored. The past had spoken, and for the first time, the future felt possible.